They say you never forget the moment someone you admire becomes someone you fear. For me, that moment came when I heard Kanye in a voice muffled behind a black mask. Asterisk, I like Hitler was in the room, sort of, not physically, but close enough to feel. The world till this is the story of how a man I once called a genius burned it all down with a tweet, a rant. And as maligned, nothing isn't a redemption story. The cracks started showing long before 2022, long before the tweets, the interviews, the cancelled deals, but back then when the world still clung to the myth of Kanye West, the genius, the provocateur, we didn't see them as cracks at all. We called them something else. We dressed them up in softer words, eccentric, artistic, bold, words that, in hindsight, feel like band-aids on a bleeding wound. Because when someone is that famous, that brilliant, that untouchable, no one wants to be the first to say something's wrong. No one wants to be the one to kill the vibe, to say that the emperor might be losing the thread. You see, when you walked into a room, he didn't just walk in, he arrived. The air changed, eyes followed, conversations paused, recalibrated around his gravitational pull. People studied his face, his outfit, his energy, trying to catch a spark of whatever alchemy he carried. The man had presence, capital presence, and it didn't matter if you were a brand exec with a 7-figure marketing budget, a rising designer praying for a collab, or a U.S. president courting cultural currency. If you was in the building, you were in orbit. That's how powerful he was. He wasn't just a rapper. Not anymore. He was a revolution. From the moment he dropped The College Dropout, the industry knew something had shifted. He didn't sound like anyone else, and more importantly, he didn't want to. He challenged the archetypes, headrest differently, thought differently, spoke differently. He was both the outsider and the king, the Kalinger and the crown. And we fans, press, brands, politicians, we loved it. The music? Unmatched, groundbreaking. The fashion? Risky, raw, visionary. The confidence? Off the charts, sometimes too much, but always magnetic. And when he launched Yeezys, it wasn't just about sneakers, it was about culture. People lined up for hours, bots crashed, sites, resale markets exploded. He wasn't selling shoes. He was selling identity, belonging, a piece of the Ye myth. Then came Sunday service, those gospel-infused pop-up churches with choir robes and sweeping landscapes, and sunlit spirituals that made cynics believe, even if just for a minute. Donda, his homage to his late mother, felt like a monument of sound, chaotic and sacred and defiantly unfinished. By the time 2021 rolled into 2022, he was more than an artist. He was a brand, a billionaire, a father, a provocateur, a headline generator, a movement. And that kind of altitude, it makes the air thin, hard to breathe, harder to think straight. But still he kept rising until he didn't, because fame, like fire, doesn't warm forever. Sometimes it burns, and for Ye, it was starting to burn everything. Quietly at first, then all at once. I remember the first time I saw the look change in someone's eyes when they talked about him. It wasn't awe anymore, it was hesitation, a pause. Like they weren't sure whether to admire or to brace for impact. That's when I knew something was shifting, that magnetic confidence. It had begun to tilt into something darker. Something more unstable. He'd show up unannounced to meetings, go on live streams and call out allies. He'd contradict himself in interviews, claim betrayal from those closest to him, speak in riddles that felt less poetic and more fragmented, broken. But we didn't call it that. We called it the price of genius. Because when someone has made you millions, hell, billions, you learn to tolerate the storms. You read them out, you protect the brand. You minimize, rationalize, strategize. But by October 2022, the storm wasn't a storm anymore. It was a meltdown. Unfiltered, relentless, unapologetic. The kind of meltdown you can't hide behind clever PR, the kind that doesn't fade with time, the kind that breaks things. And what Ye broke wasn't just his brand, or his partnerships, or even his public image. He broke trust. Trust from fans, from collaborators, from communities. Trust from the very culture that once lifted him to the clouds. Because this wasn't a creative outburst. This was something else. This was a man lighting matches in a room full of gasoline. He wasn't just controversial anymore. He was dangerous. The words weren't provocative. They were hateful. The statements weren't misunderstood. They were crystal clear. He was unraveling. And the world watched it in real time, and we, those of us who had once worked with him, fought for him, defended him, realized something bone deep and chilling. You can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. You can't protect someone who insists on walking into fire. And so, by the time the tweet went live, the one that would shatter whatever remained of the myth, weren't surprised. Not really, because the cracks had always been there. We just didn't want to see them. Or maybe, more honestly, we chose not to, until it was too late. It was late, one of those nights where time blurs at the edges, when the studio lights burned dim and you lost track of the hours. I was alone in the editing suite, scrolling through raw footage from a session we'd scrapped weeks earlier. The music pulsed softly from the speakers, half-mixed, full of ghosts. I remember sipping cold coffee, thinking about nothing in particular, just letting the beat carry me into something close to peace. And then my phone buzzed. Not a call. Not even a full notification, just a preview, a single sentence that punched through the screen and into my spine, going DEFCON 3 on Jewish people. I froze. Stared at it for a second too long, like maybe if I blinked, it would vanish. Maybe it was AI-generated garbage, a meme, a deepfake tweet, someone trolling. I clicked it. Nope. Verified. Real. Posted from Ye's account. I remember whispering, no. No. Double quotes under my breath, as if saying it would reverse it. As if disbelief could rewrite reality. But it was all there, timestamped, live, shared with the world. Public. Proud. Intentional. E had just threatened Jewish people. In front of millions. And not just any threat. He used a warped military term. DEFCON 3. He meant DEFCON 3, a US military readiness alert, but he didn't spell it right. And that somehow made it worse. It wasn't a typo you could brush off. Not when it was pointed like a knife. Not when the target was a whole group of people. My heart thudded in my chest. The way it does when you know something irreversible has just happened, because this wasn't some leaked audio or backstage outburst caught on a hot mic. This was intentional. Broadcast. Unapologetic. He didn't delete it, didn't clarify, didn't backpedal. He meant it, or at least, he wanted the world to think he did. The reaction was instant. My phone lit up like a wildfire. Group chats exploded. Managers, producers, stylists, brand liaisons, people I hadn't heard from in months, suddenly back in the feed, all asking the something. What the hell is he doing? Is this a hack? Can someone reach him? This is career suicide. But even as the shock rippled out, a deeper feeling crept in beneath it. Cold, undeniable certainty. This wasn't random. This wasn't the start of something. It was the culmination. I remembered the tension in recent weeks, how erratic he'd become, how stubborn. The way he talked about enemies in vague terms, about betrayal, about being silenced and controlled. We had all Hardim speaking code, but this wasn't coded anymore. It was direct. It was ugly, it was hate. And it wasn't the first sign, just the first time the world had no choice but to look. Online, chaos took over. People scrambled to decode it, defend it, dismantle it. Did he mean DEFCON? They asked. Maybe he's just misspeaking? But the intent was crystal clear. The message had already done its damage. You can't typo your way out of a threat, and especially not that kind of threat, because this wasn't just about E anymore. It was about history, about trauma, about a people who've endured centuries of violence and scapegoating. And now, in 2022, they were waking up to find one of most influential black artists in the world casually threatening them. Publicly. The internet erupted. Twitter locked him out. News outlets picked it up like it was a 4-alarm fire, because it was. And behind the scenes, panic. PR teams went into overdrive. Advisors disconnected their phones. Executives began drafting statements. Brands that had ridden the Yeezy wave to billions were suddenly trying to find the nearest Luffy boat. Even those who had no business ties were calculating, do I speak out? Do I stay silent? How close am I to the blast radius? For those of us who'd known him, the real him, or the version we thought we knew, it was like watching Simeon you love walk into traffic with their eyes wide open. You want to yell, to pull them back, to shake sense into them. But it's too late. The car is already coming. The impact is already inevitable. I thought about all the times we tried to help him steer back on course. All the interventions, the uncomfortable conversations, the we need to talk meetings. He'd brush them off, tell us we were being manipulated by the media, that we didn't understand what he was really trying to say. But now he was saying it plain. No metaphor. No genius. WRDPLA. Why? No layered meaning. Just raw, hateful speech, reckless and deliberate. And it wasn't going to be forgotten. Because the world doesn't forget when someone in power threatens a people who have already carried the weight of history on their backs. The scary part. This was just the beginning. Because once you say something like that and feel the world tremble, there's a dangerous kind of power in that. And ye liked power, even if it burned everything down. Within hours of that tweet, the digital world struck back. Twitter locked his account temporarily, they said at first. A violation of platform policy, the post had been flagged for hate speech. Comment sections turned into firestorms. News sites picked up the story faster than I've ever seen. Everyone from TMZ to Reuters to the New York Times had it on their front page. It wasn't just a celebrity scandal. It was a cultural earthquake. Then Instagram followed. His posts were vanishing. His stories were gone. And yet he didn't stop. Not even for a breath. He didn't issue a statement. He didn't clarify. He didn't retract. He doubled down harder than anyone expected. No apology. No reflection. Just fuel poured straight into the fire. He looked the world in the eye and essentially said, yeah, I said it. So what? And then the justification started. He told everyone, audiences, interviewers, live streams, that he couldn't possibly be anti-Semitic because, quote, black people are Jewish too. It was a half-baked invocation of a fringe theory one he clearly hadn't researched or cared to explain, but it didn't matter. To him, it sounded smart. To him, it sounded like a shield. In his mind, it made him untouchable. And that, I think, was the most terrifying part. He believed it, or at least acted like he did. He wasn't remorseful. He wasn't confused. He wasn't caught off guard. He was intentional. He started posting private messages, texts with friends, screenshots from people pleading with him to stop, names unblurred, conversations exposed, trust broken. It didn't matter whether you were his publicist, his ex, his cousin, or a fan. If you asked him to pull back, he'd make you the enemy. Then he'd broadcast your plea to the world like it was proof of some shadowy conspiracy against him. It was surreal. Every morning felt like waking up to a new disaster. He hit every podcast that would have him, sat down with fringe YouTubers, showed up in live streams shosted by known trolls, far-right figures, even openly racist platforms. He wasn't just opening doors to hate, he was storming through them. And we watched in horror. I remember one particular podcast he was ranting about control, contracts, media, using phrase that echoed every dog whistle in the book. And when the host tried to interject, to offer him a chance to clarify or soften the rhetoric, he didn't budge. He wasn't there to explain. He was there to provoke. At first, I held onto a shred of hope. Maybe this was an ugly phase. Maybe he'd wake up one morning, see the wreckage, and realize what he'd done. Maybe anyone would get through to him. But then came InfoWars. And everything changed. It was December 1st, 2022. I'll never forget that date. He walked into the studio in a full black ski mask, no facial expression, no branding, just a void where a face should be. Sitting across from him was Alex Jones, the conspiracy king himself, a man who'd been sued for defaming Sandy Hook victims, Someone so controversial even mainstream extremists kept him at arm's length. And yet, somehow, in that moment, Alex Jones became the voice of reason. That's how far he had fallen. I watched the live stream in silence, my hands trembling, my jaw clenched. The screen flickered, and then there it was. I like Hitler, I love Nazis. Those words didn't come from a troll, not a teenager behind a keyboard, not a political provocateur. They came from you. Global icon, cultural architect, a man who had once performed for presidents and sold out stadiums. Alex Jones of all people tried to walk him back, tried to offer him outs. He stammered. He said, "You don't really mean you love Hitler. Double quotes and ye." He nodded, smiled, and said something. Even worse, we need to stop dissing the Nazis all the time. My blood ran cold. This wasn't performance. This wasn't jock antics. This was sincere, unfiltered admiration for one of the darkest regimes in human history, and he was proud of it. I sat there watching in stunned silence, every second more grotesque than the last. The mask, decadence, the eerie calm. He looked like a villain straight out of dystopian fiction, but this was real. This was live. And millions were watching. There was no walking this one back. No misunderstood tweet, no PR statement that could untangle this. He'd gone past the line. So far past, there wasn't even a map anymore. The next 24 hours were a blur of fallout. Journalists called it the moment he crossed into cultural no man's land. Corporate sponsors began making silent exits. Brands that had stood beside him for over a decade severed ties behind closed doors. Private chats became public. Former allies posted cryptic apologies. Executives deleted photos. Fashion houses pulled entire campaigns off the shelves. You could feel it happening in real time. The unraveling. His music streams dropped. Socials bled followers. Online stores deactivated Yeezy inventory. It was like watching someone set fire to everything they'd ever built and smile while it burned. The InfoWars interview wasn't just a low point. It was a point of no return. And for those of us who once believed in him, collaborated with him, defended his art and his mind on this madness, it was the moment we finally stopped making excuses, because this wasn't eccentricity. It wasn't mental health. It wasn't rebellion. This was hatred. Raw, unapologetic, dangerous. And from that day forward, the world would never see ye the same again. I like Hitler, I love Nazis. Those words didn't come from a neo-Nazi forum, a hate group subreddit, or some faceless troll in a comment thread. They came from you. I remember where I was. Everyone in the industry does. December 1st, 2022. That date is seared into memory like a scar. I was in the back of a rideshare, headed to a recording studio in Midtown, earbuds in, half listening to a voice memo from a producer. Then a notification slid down my phone screen. Ye appears live on InfoWars. I didn't click it right away. I thought it was a meme, a joke, another social media stunt that would disappear in 24 hours. But as I scrolled, the headlines multiplied. Ye wears black mask, praises Hitler in live broadcast. Alex Jones visibly uncomfortable as he doubles down on Nazi admiration. My thumb froze. My heart sank. And then I tapped in. There he was, sitting across from Alex Jones, one of the most infamous conspiracy theorists in modern history. A man would once claimed the Sandy Hook massacre was staged. A man who had been sued and bankrupted for spreading hate. But that night, Alex Jones was the sane one in the room, and that's when I knew we were in uncharted territory. He was wearing a black full-face mask, not a balaclava, not a fashion statement. No branding, no holes. It covered everything. Just 2 slits for the eyes, like a villain. Like someone who didn't want to be human anymore. He wasn't there to talk about music, fashion, his kids, or even mental health. He was there for something much darker. From the moment he opened his mouth, the energy shifted. There was no hesitancy, no confusion, just pure conviction. He praised Adolf Hitler out loud, on camera, not as a metaphor, not in satire. He said it plainly. I see good things about Hitler. Every human being has something of value. Especially Hitler. It didn't stop there. He said he loved Nazis. Let me say that again. An African-American man, a man who once stood on stage and declared George Bush doesn't care about black people, sat in a studio in 2022 and said, "I love Nazis." You could see Alex Jones twitch in his chair. The man known for screaming about frogs and 9/11's inside jobs suddenly looked like he'd seen a ghost. He tried to walk it back, to soften the blow. "You don't really mean you love Hitler, do you, Buttie?" He leaned in and made it worse. He doubled down. "We've got to stop dissing the Nazis all the time." Silence fell across the internet like a thunderclap. Not the usual controversy, not the kind that invites debate. This was different. It was a rupture. I sat in that rideshare, my hands trembling. The driver kept glancing at me in the mirror like I was about to sick. I almost was, because in that moment, watching he speak with such calm about the Third Reich, I wasn't seeing anarchist unravel. I was witnessing something else. Something ideological. Something chilling. This wasn't about trolling anymore. This wasn't about mental illness. This was about hate. And the worst part? He believed what he was saying, or he wanted to believe it, and millions of people were listening. Behind the scenes, it was a full-scale emergency. Agencies scrambled to draft internal memos. Brands were calling emergency board meetings. Contracts were being combed over by lawyers. Every company that had ever touched his name was radioactive by association. Balenciaga cut ties immediately. They didn't even release a statement. They just erased him. Adidas had already been preparing an exit since the DEFCON 3 inches tweet. Now it was no longer an option. It was an obligation. The Yeezy empire, which once turned $200 sneakers into billion-dollar valuations, was crumbling by the hour. But Ye didn't blink. No apology, no nuance, no "I misspoke." And for those of us who had once worked with him, stood beside him, defended his artistic eccentricity as misunderstood brilliance, this was the final straw. Because this wasn't misunderstood. This was crystal clear. We started getting calls, journalists, documentary producers, former colleagues. People who used to praise him now want a distance. Were there signs? They asked. Yes. There had been signs, but no one thought it would go this far. No one thought we'd be hearing Nazi praise from the mouth of someone who once championed social justice, someone who'd built his career on speaking truth to power, someone who'd fought for the voiceless and was now aligning himself with history's most infamous voice of genocide. I remember texting a friend in disbelief. He's not coming back from this. And that realization hit hard. Not because I felt sorry for Ye, not after what he said, but because I had once believed in him, believed in his creativity, his voice, his ability to change the world. And maybe he did change the world. Just not the way we hoped. The interview went viral. Millions watched, millions condemned. But millions also shared it. Some cheered, some nodded along. The worst elements of the internet took it as permission, and that's what scared me the most. Hate always finds a home, and Ye, whether he realized it or not, had just given it a megaphone. I wish I could say the world responded with swift unity. But that's not how things work anymore. Truth bends, platforms hesitate. Algorithms don't care about morality, they care about engagement. And he was trending again. Not for a song. Not for a fashion drop. Not for an award, but for praising Hitler. And in that moment, the man who once asked, "How could you be so heartless?" had become something unrecognizable. He wasn't misunderstood. He wasn't misquoted. He was very clear. And from that day forward, his legacy was no longer just about music, or art, or innovation. It was about a choice to embrace hate and call it love. I like Hitler, I love Nazis. Those words didn't come from a neo-Nazi forum, a hate group subreddit, or some faceless troll in a comment thread. They came from you. I remember where I was. Everyone in the industry does. December 1st, 2022, that date is seared into memory like a scar. I was in the back of a rideshare, headed to a recording studio in Midtown. earbuds in, half listening to a voice memo from a producer. Then a notification slid down my phone screen. Ye appears live on InfoWars. I didn't click it right away. I thought it was a meme. A joke, another social media stunt that would disappear in 24 hours. But as I scrolled, the headlines multiplied. Ye wears black mask, praises Hitler in live broadcast. Alex Jones visibly uncomfortable as Ye doubles down on Nazi admiration. My thumb froze. My heart sank. And then I tapped in. There he was, sitting across from Alex Jones, one of the most infamous conspiracy theorists in modern history. A man would once claimed the Sandy Hook massacre was staged. A man who had been sued and bankrupted for spreading hate. But that night, Alex Jones was the sane one in the room, and that's when I knew we were in uncharted territory. He was wearing a black full face mask, not a balaclava, not a fashion statement. No branding, no holes. It covered everything. Just two slits for the eyes, like a villain. Like someone who didn't want to be human anymore. He wasn't there to talk about music, fashion, his kids, or even mental health. He was there for something much darker. From the moment he opened his mouth, the energy shifted. There was no hesitancy, no confusion, just pure conviction. He praised Adolf Hitler out loud, on camera, not as a metaphor, not in satire. He said it plainly. I see good things about Hitler. Every human being has something of value. Especially Hitler. It didn't stop there. He said he loved Nazis. Let me say that again. Ye, an African-American man, a man who once stood on stage and declared George Bush doesn't care about black people, sat in a studio in 2022 and said, I love Nazis. You could see Alex Jones twitch in his chair. The man known for screaming about frogs and 9/11s inside of jobs suddenly looked like he'd seen a ghost. He tried to walk it back, to soften the blow. You don't really mean you love Hitler, do you, buddy? He leaned in and made it worse. He doubled down. We've got to stop dissing the Nazis all the time. Silence fell across the internet like a thunderclap. Not the usual controversy, not the kind that invites debate. This was different. It was a rupture. I sat in that ride share, my hands trembling. The driver kept glancing at me in the mirror like I was about to sick. I almost was, because in that moment, watching ye speak with such calm about the Third Reich, I wasn't seeing anarchist unravel. I was witnessing something else. Something ideological. Something chilling. This wasn't about trolling anymore. This wasn't about mental illness. This was about hate. And the worst part? He believed what he was saying, or he wanted to believe it, and millions of people were listening. Behind the scenes, it was a full-scale emergency. Agencies scrambled to draft internal memos. Brands were calling emergency board meetings. Contracts were being combed over by lawyers. Every company that had ever touched his name was radioactive by association. Balenciaga cut ties immediately. They didn't even release a statement. They just erased him. Adidas had already been preparing an exit since the DEFCON 3 inches tweet. Now it was no longer an option. It was an obligation. The Yeezy empire, which once turned $200 sneakers into billion-dollar valuations, was crumbling by the hour. But ye didn't blink. No apology, no nuance, no I misspoke. And for those of us who had once worked with him, stood beside him, defended his artistic eccentricity as misunderstood brilliance, this was the final straw. Because this wasn't misunderstood. This was crystal clear. We started getting calls, journalists, documentary producers, former colleagues. People who used to praise him now want a distance. Were there signs? They asked. Yes. There had been signs, but no one thought it would go this far. No one thought we'd be hearing Nazi praise from the mouth of someone who once championed social justice, someone who'd built his career on speaking truth to power, someone who'd fought for the voiceless and was now aligning himself with history's most infamous voice of genocide. I remember texting a friend in disbelief. He's not coming back from this. And that realization hit hard. Not because I felt sorry for Ye, not after what he said, but because I had once believed in him, believed in his creativity, his voice, His ability to change the world. And maybe he did change the world. Just not the way we hoped. The interview went viral. Millions watched, millions condemned. But millions also shared it. Some cheered, some nodded along. The worst elements of the internet took it as permission, and that's what scared me the most. Hate always finds a home, and Ye, whether he realized it or not, had just given it a megaphone. I wish I could say the world responded with swift unity. But that's not how things work anymore. Truth bends, platforms hesitate. Algorithms don't care about morality, they care about engagement. And he was trending again. Not for a song. Not for a fashion drop. Not for an award, but for praising Hitler. And in that moment, the man who once asked, "How could you be so heartless?" had become something unrecognizable. He wasn't misunderstood. He wasn't misquoted. He was very clear. And from that day forward, his legacy was no longer just about music, or art, or innovation. It was about a choice to embrace hate and call it love. You know things are bad when even the money walks, and not just the endorsements, not just the sneaker sales or tour bookings, I mean the actual money. The infrastructure behind it. The banks, the vaults, the pipelines that quietly move the wealth of the rich and powerful behind locked doors and NDA-coded contracts. I never thought I'd see the day, but Ye pushed it that far. And in the aftermath of the InfoWars interview, after the smoke from Adidas and Balenciaga and the rest began to clear, it became clear that even the institutions that usually stay silent were cutting the cord. One of the first whispers came from a source I trusted inside Morgan Chase. A simple message, nothing flashy. They're closing his accounts. I blinked. JPMorgan, one of the most powerful banks in the world, a place that handles billionaires, heads of state, Fortune 500s, entire governments. They were just freezing an account, they were cutting ties, evicting him from the high tower of capital. It wasn't a freeze based on suspected fraud, not legal pressure, not public outcry. It was voluntary. They didn't want to be associated with him, period. They didn't release a big statement. There were no interviews, just a quiet letter sent to Ye's legal team. The message was simple: you have until specific date to move your assets elsewhere. After that, we single quotes redone. Now, understand something. Banks don't operate like the entertainment industry. They don't get pulled into celebrity feuds or viral culture wars. They're designed to be invisible. But when Morgan walks away from you, that's not just rejection, that's exile. And soon, the dominoes began to fall. Private bankers, those silent, tuxedo-wearing sharks who managed the fortunes of the ultra-wealthy, began ghosting him. Calls weren't returned, meetings got cancelled. The lines went cold because once one major institution cuts you off, others take notice. It's not about PR, it's about risk. No bank wants to be the one left holding the bag. If you spiral deeper, no investor wants their name tied to someone who's gone radioactive. No financier wants screenshots of your praise for genocidal dictators appearing on the same page as their annual ESG report. You wasn't just a bad look. He was now a liability. I got a message from a digital asset advisor based in Zurich. He'd worked with Ye's team once, helping secure crypto portfolios for fashion launches. I just got off a call. 2 funds have paused all movements connected to Yeezy, pending internal review. No one's touching it, not even for a consulting fee. When the Swiss start hesitating, you know the walls are closing in. This wasn't just Ye losing money. It was Ye being shut out of systems. The same financial systems he once used to fund stadium shows, build fashion lines, and flood the market with whatever creative vision he could conjure. Suddenly, the pipelines were drying up. I kept thinking about how surreal it all was. Just a year before, Forbes had been celebrating him as a rare black billionaire. Articles praised his entrepreneurship, his independence from traditional labels. He had bank accounts most of us couldn't even imagine, and now, he was being kicked out of boardrooms like a scandalized CEO. What shook me the most wasn't just that the money was vanishing, but that Ye didn't seem to care. He wasn't pleading, wasn't going on damage control, wasn't issuing any kind of financial statement or restructuring strategy. He was ranting, still talking about Nazis, still posting still spiraling. As if he believed none of this would stick. As if he thought the banks needed him more than he needed them. He was wrong. The headlines started to reflect the shift. From billionaire to blacklisted, Ye's financial ties severed after anti-Semitic rants banks quietly exit Kanye West. Relationships amid escalating fallout. Financial industry distances itself from Ye as portfolio shrinks by billions behind closed doors. Accountants and business managers scrambled to contain the damage. There were rumors unconfirmed, but believable that internal finance teams couldn't even get in touch with him. Some of them hadn't been paid. Others were afraid to be associated, fearing regulatory review or reputational blowback. And then came the music platforms. Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon. They didn't ban his music, per SE. That would have triggered First Amendment debates, calls for censorship, but they did something quieter and far more effective. They removed him from playlists. Silence by omission. No more Ye at the top of rap caviar. No more algorithmic boosts. No features. No interviews. Just. Background noise. His music was still there, but it had been ghosted. And in the age of streaming, if you're not on the home screen, you might as well not exist. Every time I opened the news, I saw a new bridge burning behind him. Def Jam, his longtime label, issued a quiet but decisive break. No more releases. No future contracts. Nothing in the pipeline. The banks walked. The labels walked. The platforms went cold. He was floating. UNTETHERED.UNBANKED. And housed by the industry that once built temples around him. I wish I could say that was the end of it. That you would look at the wreckage, fall silent, and reconsider. But he did in single quotes. He kept talking, kept doubling down, kept trying to turn the chaos into a brand. He started teasing his own social platforms, talking about buying conservative apps, crowdfunding new business ventures, claiming he didn't need their system. But anyone who's ever worked in finance, in infrastructure, in business, knows this truth. Even the richest need banks. Money is power, but only if you can move it. Only if someone's willing to carry it. And no one wanted to carry it anymore. So when people ask me when it really ended. I don't say the tweet. I don't say the interview. I don't even say Adidas. I say this: when the banks walked away. The game was over, because you can survive bad PR, you can weather scandals, you can rebuild a brand, but once the foundation of money is pulled out from under you, there's nothing left to stand on, not even for a man like Ye. You know, things have spiraled beyond repair when the President of the United States speaks without saying your name, and everyone still knows exactly who he's talking about. It was early December 2022. The fallout was already a flood. Ye had torched every bridge in sight. Adidas, Balenciaga, Schmorgan, Spotify, Def Jam. The list stretched endlessly. But the morning I saw that tweet from President Biden, that was different, because when the most powerful office in the free world feels compelled to comment even indirectly, you've officially crossed a line not even politics will protect. The tweet read, "I just want to make a few things clear. The Holocaust happened. Hitler was a demonic figure. And instead of giving it a platform, we should call out and reject anti-Semitism wherever it hides. Silence is complicity. No name. No hashtags, but we didn't need one. Everyone knew who it was about. The timing wasn't random. Just days before, Ye had sat beside Nick Fuentes, a known white supremacist, Holocaust denier, and the kind of person whose very presence in a room tells you it's already poisoned. Together, they hadn't with former President Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago. Yes, you read that right. A rap icon who once said Bush doesn't care about black people was now having dinner with Trump. And a Holocaust denier. The headlines wrote themselves. Trump dines with Ye and far-right activist Nick Fuentes. White House condemns anti-Semitism following Ye's Nazi praise. Backlash mounts as Kanye spirals further into extremism. The story exploded. It was no longer about entertainment. No longer about brand deals and playlists and dropped endorsements. This was geopolitical. Ye's descent wasn't just affecting his own image, it was making waves across nations. I remember seeing Biden's tweet and just sitting there, not scrolling, not reacting, just frozen because when the president speaks, it's more than a rebuke. It's a warning, and it wasn't just Biden. Within hours, a cascade of leaders and public figures followed, heads of state, diplomats, political commentators from both sides of the aisle, Jewish advocacy groups, Holocaust survivors. It was like someone had flipped a switch. People who had remained quiet through the chaos, maybe unsure of what to say, maybe hoping it would all pass, were suddenly speaking loudly, firmly. Because when you praise Nazis, when you say, "I love Hitler, when you dine with white supremacists, you don't leave room for neutrality anymore." Even Ye's musical peers, some of whom had stayed silent through years of his unpredictable behavior, finally broke ranks. Questlove tweeted simply, "This is heartbreaking. I can't even process it." Jack Antonoff posted a black square with the words, "You're not a genius if you're spreading hate." John Legend, once a close friend of Ye's, wrote, "We've lost someone, and it hurts, but hate speech isn't a symptom. It's a choice." Some tried to reach out privately. Most didn't get through, and for those of us who had spent years watching Ye shape culture, redefine fashion, dominate music, we couldn't help but feel that same cold, sick emptiness, not just because he was falling, but because of how deliberately he was doing it. You see, there's a difference between someone collapsing and someone jumping. And he wasn't collapsing, he was diving into the fire and dragging the rest of us with him. The press conferences were surreal, reporters asking White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre if the administration condemned Ye, Jewish community leaders holding emergency panels about celebrity-endorsed anti-Semitism, Holocaust education groups issuing open letters to media outlets, begging them not to downplay what was happening. Even inside the entertainment industry, crisis teams began coordinating not just to distance their clients from Ye, but to speak out clearly, publicly, and on record. Because now, silence wasn't safe. Not anymore. Silence had become complicity. I spoke to an executive at a major streaming service, off the record, of course. He told me their internal Slack channel was flooded that day. "We're getting pressure from Washington now," he said. "Congressional aides are asking why we still promote his music. Not remove it, not ban it, but promote it." That was the distinction. And for platforms that run on algorithms, that's the real weapon. Visibility. So Ye's name quietly disappeared from homepages. His songs no longer landed on curated playlists. Documentary offers dried up. Talk show invitations went dark. He wasn't blacklisted per SC. He was being faded out. Not by mobs. Not by censorship. By the system itself, pulling him gently off stage with a kind of cold, bureaucratic efficiency. And still. He didn't stop. Still ranting. Still live streaming with far-right figures. Still trying to paint himself as a victim, claiming there was some global plot to silence him. But the reality? He silenced himself. The moment he made space for Nazi praise, he closed every door that had once been wide open. And what makes it also heavy. Is that this wasn't just about Ye. This was about something bigger. Something darker. Because anti-Semitism? It's not just a fringe belief, it's a spark, a trigger. The kind of poison that, when given oxygen, spreads fast. And Ye, with his platform, his influence, his global reach, he poured gasoline on it. And for every follower he lost. He gained a more dangerous one. That's why Biden stepped in. That's why leaders across the world spoke out. Because when a man that famous goes that far. It doesn't just stain his legacy. It endangers lives. That night, I sat with the weight of it all, not as a producer, not as someone who had once worked in his orbit, but as a human being, a citizen, a witness to a tragedy of choice. And as I read Biden's words one more time, "Silence is complicity," I understood something I'd been avoiding for weeks. We weren't watching a fall. We were watching a man tear down his own legacy brick by brick and daring the world to stop him. This is the part I struggled to write, not because I didn't have the words, but because the truth is complicated, uncomfortable, not easily packaged in a tweet or a headline. But it needs to be said because you can't talk about what happened to him, what he did without talking about mental health. And you can't talk about mental health ... without talking about responsibility. The two things can and must exist side by side. I remember the first time he told the world he had bipolar disorder. It wasn't some PR leak. It wasn't buried in a footnote. It was on the cover of an album, bold letters scrawled across the Wyoming landscape. I hate being bipolar. It's awesome. That was 2018. Back then, I thought it was brave. He was doing what so few celebrities dared, putting mental illness front and center. Owning it, making it visible, making it real. In interviews, he'd speak candidly about manic episodes, about paranoia, about feeling invincible and then drowning in despair. He said it didn't feel like a curse, it felt like a superpower, and maybe, in his highest moments, it was. But the thing about bipolar disorder, the part people often forget, is that untreated, unmanaged, and unchecked, it can twist everything around you. It can convince you you're right when you're deeply wrong. It can turn warnings into attacks, advice into betrayal, and compassion into control. And he was spiraling. When Kim, his then wife, posted that message on Instagram in 2020, I read it a dozen times. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't damage control. It was something else. It was a plea. As many of you know, Kanye has bipolar disorder. Anyone who has this or has a loved one in their life who does knows how incredibly complicated and painful it is to understand. She asked for compassion, for space, for empathy. And in that moment, I felt it. I truly did, because I've seen what bipolar can do, not just in but in people I love. I've watched it consume brilliant minds, turn creativity into chaos. I've watched people I care about lose themselves and claw their way back and lose themselves again. It's not linear, it's not pretty, and it's not a choice. But here's the line in the sand: mental illness is not the same as moral failure. Bipolar disorder doesn't cause racism. It doesn't make you anti-Semitic. It doesn't compel you to praise Hitler. That's not mental illness, that's ideology. Let me put it another way. You can be mentally ill and still be accountable. You can be manic ... and still responsible for your words. You can be struggling ... and still know that love and hate aren't interchangeable. Ye's diagnosis didn't write those tweets. It didn't put that black mask on his face. It didn't sit him down at InfoWars and feed him lines about Nazis. That was Ye. All of it. And this is where the conversation gets messy. Because people want a clean narrative. They want to believe he lost control, that he didn't know what he was saying, that it was all just an episode. But the reality, he knew, he meant it. And when people tried to intervene, friends, family, collaborators, even strangers, he pushed them away. I remember hearing about a staged intervention in early November, quiet, off the radar. A few trusted people flown into a neutral location, security present. A doctor waiting nearby. He showed up. He listened. For 5 minutes. Then he got up, walked out, and boarded a private jet to do another podcast where he said, "They're freeing to silence me." That was it. Every lifeline tossed to him he treated like a leash. And I get it. We've built Ye into a myth, a genius, a visionary, a rebel. We want to believe he's broken, not cruel, sick, not dangerous. But what if it's both? What if the pain is real and the hate is deliberate? What if he's suffering and choosing harm at the same time? Because I think that's what we're seeing, and I think that's why people are so paralyzed by it. Because when someone with a mental illness makes a mistake, we rally, we empathize, we open our hearts. But when they step into hatred ... we don't know what to do. So we freeze, we debate, we stall. And in that stall, the damage continues. Ye's defenders clung to the bipolar explanation like a shield. He's not well, he's off his meds, he needs help, and maybe all of that is true, but that doesn't undo what he said. That doesn't unhurt the communities he attacked. That doesn't rebuild the trust he obliterated. Mental illness can explain behavior. It doesn't excuse it. I know people who struggle with bipolar disorder every day, quietly, desperately. People who would never use their condition as a justification for hate. And you know what they tell me? Don't let him make us look worse, because that's the other tragedy here. When someone with Ye's visibility uses their platform recklessly, it doesn't just hurt the people he targets. It hurts everyone else struggling in the dark. Everyone else who has to answer for him. Who now has to explain that they're not like that they're not dangerous, not delusional, not hateful. They're human. Just hurting. So yes, mental health matters. Yes, he needs help. Yes, it's tragic to watch someone unravel so publicly, but none of that changes this truth. He made a choice, and the consequences of that choice are real, because you don't get to weaponize your pain to justify someone else's suffering. You don't get to blame your illness when your words incite violence. You don't get to hide behind a diagnosis when you look a camera dead in the lens and say, "I love Nazis." There is space in this story for both things to be true, that Ye is mentally unwell, and that he still knew what he was doing, and that's the space we need to sit in now. Not to excuse him, not to demonize him, but to understand why this matters. And how we stop it from happening again. Asterisk. There's a moment in every unraveling when you stop asking, "How can we fix this?" and you start whispering, "How did we let it get this far?" For me, that moment came not with a tweet, or a headline, or a boardroom phone call, but with a feeling, a cold, hollow feeling, the feeling of watching someone you once looked up to become something else. It's hard to explain what it's like being inside the Ye universe when the engine is still roaring, when the world still sees him as untouchable, when he walks into rooms and every head turns, when the interns freeze, when the executives sweat, when the journalists lean in just a little too far. He had gravity. Not the kind you learn, not the kind you earn, the kind you're born with. I remember studio sessions where the beat would drop and everyone would fall silent, not because of protocol, but because you could tell something important was happening. You could feel it. He had a way of speaking ideas into being sprawling, chaotic ideas that shouldn't have worked, but somehow did, and when they didn't work, he'd shout, he'd pace, he'd tear through rooms with this look in his eyes, like lightning trying to find a place to land. That was the pattern. Brilliance, friction, explosion, innovation. Over and over again. Until suddenly, the explosions weren't part of the process anymore. They were the process. At first, I didn't notice it, or maybe I did, and I just didn't want to admit it. There were signs, subtle ones. Longer rants, shorter patience, jokes that weren't jokes anymore. Accusations whispered behind closed doors. An ever-shrinking circle of trusted people, most of whom were yes men, or chaos chasers who fed off his storm. The old crew, the ones who helped shape the art, the music, the vision? Gone, pushed out, ghosted, branded disloyal. All that remained were shadows, echoes, people too scared to tell the truth, or too desperate to stay close to the flame. I sat in meetings where we planned drops that never came, watched timelines get rewritten every hour, saw staff burned out and replaced like batteries, and the entire time, we told ourselves the same. Lee, it's just Ye being Ye, because when you build a culture around genius, you start to excuse the madness that sometimes comes with it, until one day, the madness stops being a side effect and starts becoming the mission. I remember one phone call in particular. It was a week after the DEFCON 3 inches tweet. The air was thick, people were leaving, brands were walking. Every group chat I was in had one question on repeat: what's he doing? But no one had the answer. So I called someone still close to the inner circle, one of the few people Ye still listened to, at least occasionally. He answered on the third ring, whispered like he was hiding in a hallway. He thinks this is a reset, that this is how he breaks the system. I asked him to explain. He thinks if everything burns, he'll be free. He wants to rebuild, but not with them, against them, that. Word stuck with me, because once someone starts using them without defining who they are, the spiral is already in motion. The next time I saw Ye in person, it wasn't in a studio or a fashion house. It was in a dimly lit green room backstage, at a podcast taping no one should have agreed to. He walked in with two people I didn't recognize, young, pale, twitchy energy. Far-right types, if I had to guess, they carried bags full of cameras and wires. He didn't acknowledge me at first. Just paced. Then he turned and looked straight through me. "They're scared of me now," he said. "That means I'm doing something right." I didn't respond. What was there to say? He didn't want truth. He wanted confirmation, and I couldn't give it to him. So he moved on, literally turned away mid-sentence and started talking to the guy holding the GoPro. What does it feel like on the inside? It feels like holding your breath for weeks. It feels like getting texts at 3 a.m. with cryptic links and no context, like getting emails labeled urgent delete after reading, like sitting in rooms where everyone is nodding but no one is okay. It feels like grief, not the kind that comes after someone dies, the kind that comes after someone leaves, but their body keeps moving. I used to wonder if I should have said something earlier, been louder, firmer, done more to stop the train before it went off the rails. But the truth? There was no brake. He removed it years ago, and anyone who tried to install one was thrown from the car. That's the part no one on the outside sees. They think people stood by and watched him implode like it was entertainment. But most of us? We tried. We begged. We intervened. We called. We staged meetings. We offered resources. We reached out, and when we did, we were met with two responses. You're not loyal. You're scared of the truth. That's how he framed it. Every hand offered was a leash. Every concern was an attack. There were days I told myself, he's just venting, and then there were days I knew, deep down, that he was gone, not physically, but ideologically, spiritually, morally. Gone. And he wasn't coming back. What does it feel like on the inside? It feels like betrayal. Like watching someone walk into fire while calling it freedom. It feels like loving a person who no longer exists and hating the one they became. It feels like silence. Like screaming internally while the world watches, likes, shares, reposts, and no one stops it, because stopping it means risking proximity, and everyone wants the genius. No one wants the responsibility. So we watched him go from innovator to agitator, from cultural icon to cautionary tale. And as the circle around him shrank, and the mask tightened, and the rhetoric darkened, we realized something horrifying. He didn't need an audience anymore. He was the audience, feeding off himself, broadcasting from an echo chamber made of his own delusions. I still have the texts. The photos, the unreleased tracks, the sketches of ideas that'll never see daylight. But when I look at them now, they don't feel like memories. They feel like evidence of how far a man can fall when no one can reach him. There's always a bill at the end of madness, even when you think you're too powerful, too brilliant, too untouchable to pay it. It comes for ye. It came all at once, and the price? Everything. I've worked with artists who've burned bridges. I've seen egos implode, labels torpedo tour, and multi-million-dollar partnerships. But what ye did, this wasn't just self-destruction. This was scorched earth. He didn't just alienate colleagues, he dismantled the very structures that held up his empire. From fashion to music to finance to politics to the global stage, he tore through every relationship, every alliance, every ounce of goodwill he'd spent 2 decades building, and he did it smiling. The thing about power is it's fragile. You think you're holding it, but often it's other people holding it for you, lifting you, lending you credibility, giving you platforms, visibility, access. Once those people step back, the fall is instant. That's what happened to Ye. One by one, the hands pulled away. I remember a conversation with a high-ranking executive from one of the biggest streaming platforms in the world. We were in a private lounge at an industry event, low light, drinks on the table, everyone trying to pretend the Ye fire wasn't the only thing on their minds, but it was. He leaned in and said, flatly, "We're watching his numbers. They've dropped 40% in a week." He said it without emotion, just data, cold, calculated. I asked if they'd consider banning him altogether. He shook his head. "We don't need to. The audience is doing it for us." That was the final cost. The audience, not the brands, not the platforms, not even the government. The people, the ones who made him a billionaire, Who bought the shoes, played the tracks, filled the stadiums? The ones who looked at him and saw not just an artist, but a reflection of themselves. He didn't just lose fans, he lost trust, and once that's gone, you don't come back from that. His albums, once instant cultural events, now sat quiet in the charts. No more frenzy, no more midnight listening parties. No more leaked DMOS dominating group chats. The music still existed, sure, but it was haunted, stained, tied forever to a voice that praised Hitler. You could hear it differently now. You couldn't unhear it, and the shoes, Yeezys, used to sell out in seconds. Now, some retailers stopped carrying them entirely. Others sold them in silence, no campaigns, no tags, no mentions. Some buyers burned theirs, some flipped them, some boxed them up and shoved them in a closet, unsure what to do with the product that had become radioactive. The resale market collapsed. Sneakers that once went for $1,000 plus now sat at a fraction of their value. Collectors whispered about the crash. Resellers dropped him from their inventory lists. It wasn't just that people didn't want to buy Yeezys anymore, they didn't want to be seen with them. One day, I got a message from a longtime collaborator, someone who had helped Ye shape his visual world, his shows, his stage designs, the look and feel of the Yeezy brand. He texted me to words, "I'm out." I didn't have to ask what he meant. He sent another message, a photo of a mural being painted over. It had been Yee's silhouette, arms raised, face up, messianic. A symbol of his rise. Now it was being erased, layer by layer, gone. What does it mean to lose everything? It means losing not just money but meaning. Not just access but identity. Ye built his legacy around impact. Around being seen, around mattering. Now, people stopped saying his name, even. The criticism faded. That's when I knew it was over, because when people stopped talking, it's not mercy. It's indifference. He tried to come back, tried to speak out, claimed censorship, claimed victimhood, claimed God was still guiding him, but the noise wasn't there anymore. He would post, and the likes wouldn't spike. He would stream, and the views plateaued. He would rant, and the world shrug. I heard rumors. That he was trying to launch his own streaming platform, that he was buying land in the desert to build a compound, that he wanted to restart everything from scratch. But it was all fragments, whispers, static. Because when you torch every bridge, you have to swim alone, and the ocean is cold. I kept thinking about his legacy, what it was, what it could have been. This was a man who redefined sound, who shattered fashion boundaries, who put a choir on a mountain and made the world stop to listen, who built empires from nothing, who turned pain into poetry, struggle into spectacle, grief into gospel. But then he turned hate into headlines, and now, all of it lives in the shadow of that black mask. Some people say he'll bounce back, that cancel culture is fake, that the system can't silence someone like Ye forever. Maybe. But bouncing back requires a foundation. And Ye has none left. The labels are gone, the banks are gone, the brands are gone, the people are gone, and you can't build an empire on ashes. There's a cost to everything. To every word, every post, every platform you stand on. And Ye paid the ultimate price, not because the world was cruel, but because he was, and cruelty, no matter how loud it is, always comes due. Legacy. It's the last thing they remember, and the only thing you leave behind. And when the dust settles, when the headlines fade and the cameras stop rolling, that's what people talk about. Not what you did, but who you became. So what do we do with Ye's legacy now? That's the question no one wants to answer, because the answer hurts. For years, we called him a genius. And not lightly. He reshaped sound. He disrupted fashion. He made vulnerability cool, faith radical, and black artistry unapologetically loud. He could take soul samples and distort them into anthems. He could fill stadiums with nothing but a hoodie, a red light, and presence. He made the culture bend, and for a time, it felt like he could do anything. But then he did something we never expected. He broke the spell, not with a failed album or an offbeat look, but with words that cut through history like a blade. Words that turned admiration into nausea, that made people question every lyric, every sermon, every runway strut that came before, because when someone praises Hitler on camera and doesn't blink, something inside you shifts. It's like a glitch in memory. You try to separate the man from the music, the art from the artist, but the lines blur. You press play on ultralight beam and hear silence where the spirit used to be. You watch the life of Pablo visuals and remember the black mask instead. The past starts to rot, even the beauty begins to stink, and yet some still hold on. I hear it all the time, but you can't deny the impact. He was just mentally ill. We shouldn't erase what he gave the world, and I get it. I do. Because art matters. Legacy matters, but so does harm. And when someone uses their platform to spread hate, especially someone whose voice reaches millions, we don't get to pretend it's separate. It's intertwined now. You can't tell the story of my beautiful, dark, twisted fantasy without the InfoWars interview. You can't teach Jesus without acknowledging the Holocaust denial, the anti-Semitic tirades, the people hurt by what came next. That's part of the legacy now. A scar that doesn't fade. I remember being at a college panel months later. The topic was art versus accountability. Ye's name came up almost immediately. A student stood up nervous but bold and asked, "Can you be a genius and still be a monster?" The room went quiet, and in that silence, I felt the weight of the question, because that's the thing people don't say out loud. We're grieving, not just the man, but the idea of him. The hope of him. The belief that maybe, just maybe, someone so complicated could carry the light and the darkness and still make something holy. But hate corrupts everything it touches, and now that light, it's dimmed, muted, distant. People ask me all the time, do you think he'll come back? And what they really mean is, do you think we'll forgive him? I don't know. Forgiveness is personal, but trust? That's structural. And he broke it. Not just with a community, not just with Jewish people, not just with fans. With the world. He betrayed the sacred bond between artist and audience, the one where we agreed to listen, even when we don't understand. He weaponized that trust, turned it into a megaphone for cruelty, and once you do that, the mic doesn't sound the same anymore. Sometimes I wonder what he thinks about now, alone, unfollowed, uninvited. Does he replay the applause in his mind? Try to remember what it felt like to be loved? Does he still hear the crowd when the room is quiet? Or has the silence become his only chorus? Because fame is loud, but shame? Shame is whisper quiet. I think back to the beginning, before the masks, before the rants, before the spirals. There was a boy from Chicago who lost his mother, who found God in chords, who turned grief into gold. I miss that boy. I mourn him, because he's not here anymore. What's left is a shell. A headline, a man who mistook fire for freedom and didn't care. Who got burned? So where does that leave us? With a complicated legacy, one built on brilliance, but crumbled by ego. Distorted by hate. A legacy that demands we remember everything. The beats, the vision, the influence. And the damage. Because to forget either side is to lie. To pretend, and we've done enough of that already. In the end, legacy isn't about what you make. It's about what you leave behind. And he left behind a warning, a case study in unchecked power, in silence that went on too long. In the consequences of confusing platform with purpose, his name will be studied, not just in music classes, but in ethics lectures, crisis PR casebooks, and social psychology. Because this wasn't just a fall. It was a lesson. And if we're brave enough to learn from it, maybe we can stop the next one from falling the same way. Asterisk. And then everything went quiet. No more live streams. No more headlines. No more viral outbursts burning across social media like brush fires. Just quiet. That's how it ends, not with a bang, but with indifference. And that silence, it's louder than any microphone ye ever held. The world moved on, slowly, uneasily, but it moved. Fashion weeks came and went without Yeezy. Award shows skipped his name. Streaming platforms updated their homepages. His music no longer front and center. Even the culture, the same one he once reigned over like a self-declared prophet, turned the page. Not all at once. But you could feel it, the shift, the way conversations started to drift, the way the anger became fatigue. The way even his most loyal fans stopped defending, stopped arguing, stopped posting. Eventually, they just stopped. You don't notice. The world forgetting someone in real time. It's not a ceremony. There's no announcement. It's in the subtleties, the group chat where no one shares his lyrics anymore, the DJ who skips his song on purpose, the playlist curators who quietly pull his hits from rotation. The fashion editors who pretend the collaborations never happened. Erasure not through censorship, but through choice. At first, I thought there'd be a reckoning, a big apology, a redemption tour, something, but nothing came, just scattered appearances on fringe podcasts. Unhinged Instagram lives that barely reached anyone. Broken interviews where he repeated the same rhetoric to an audience that had already turned away. He wasn't banned, he was abandoned. And that's a different kind of exile. The kind where no one needs to push you out because you've already walked too far to be followed. I heard he tried to launch something new, a social media platform, a fashion drop, an album. It barely registered. The press didn't care, the fans didn't show, the critics didn't bother. Even controversy has a shelf life, and he exhausted it. One day, I visited an old friend who designed sets for his Sunday services. We stood in his garage, surrounded by crates of archived props, massive wooden crosses, stained glass panels, choir robes, and touched for years. He opened a box marked Yeezy SS19. Inside were sketches, mood boards, staged diagrams for a show that never happened. He looked at them like artifacts. Not with nostalgia. Not with pride. With a kind of quiet mourning. He could have been something sacred, he said. I nodded. He was, and then he wasn't. So yes, the world moved on. The same way it always does after tragedy. Slowly, painfully, quietly. Like a tide erasing footprints from a beach. And what's left behind? Debris, lessons, ghosts. Sometimes, when I'm walking through the city, I'll catch a flash of it, a pair of Yeezys on someone's feet. A distant voice humming, flashing lights. A mural half painted over, but not quite gone, and it hits me like a memory I didn't ask for, because that's the thing about cultural trauma, it lingers, not as noise, but as echo. People ask if I think he'll ever come back. They say, time heals. Public memory fades. Doesn't everyone get a second chance? Maybe, but not everyone earns one. And he hasn't even asked. Not really. No genuine apology, no outreach to the communities he hurt. No public reflection, no accountability. Just silence, or worse, more noise disguised as defiance. Redemption can't be demanded. It has to be earned, and the path back starts with remorse. He never took that step. So the world moved on. Without him. New artists rose, new icons emerged. New conversations took center stage. The space he once occupied, the throne he built with beats and bricks and brilliance, sat empty for a while, but eventually, someone else sat down. That's how time works. It doesn't pause for anyone, not even gods of their own making. In the end, Ye's story became something else, a warning, a scar, a chapter in textbooks that say, this is what happens when fame outpaces accountability. He could have been remembered as a revolutionary. Instead, he'll be studied as a tragedy, not just for what he said, but for how long we let him say it. I keep thinking back to one of his earliest lyrics. I want to scream so loud for you. He did, we all heard it, but somewhere along the way, that scream stopped being for us. It became about him. And in that echo chamber of unchecked ego, he mistook volume for vision. But we remember not just the music, not just the masks, but the moment it broke, the moment the world turned, the moment we finally said, enough. The world moved on. And in that movement, there's pain, but also hope. Hope that next time we listen sooner, speak louder, stand firmer, because culture isn't just shaped by talent. It's shaped by what we tolerate. And this time, we chose not to tolerate hate. Asterisk.